3 seconds. That's all it took for Linda West to destroy her life. 3 seconds of tequila courage, salt on a stranger's lips, and the metallic taste of bourbon mixed with something darker. Danger, maybe, or blood. She didn't know yet that she'd just kissed Miami's most lethal secret, that those 3 seconds would cost her everything she'd built and give her everything she'd never dared to want. The velvet wave didn't pulse anymore. It held its breath. She pulled back, heart slamming against her ribs, expecting a grin or maybe outrage. Instead, she found something that made her stomach drop 6 floors. Lee Young-suk's eyes locked onto hers with the precision of a man who never missed. Dark and unreadable and absolutely focused. He was built like violence made elegant, not the gym-sculpted kind of large, but the functional kind. The kind that suggested he knew exactly how much pressure it took to break bone. His black shirt fit him like armor. The floral tattoos crawling up his neck bloomed in shades of ink that disappeared beneath his collar. Beautiful and brutal. Silver hoops glinted in his ears under the strobing red lights. And his hands. God, his hands rested on the VIP booth's table like weapons waiting for orders. One of them had fresh cuts across the knuckles, blood still dark and wet under the neon. Not his blood, she understood with sickening clarity. Someone else's. "You taste like bad decisions," he said, voice low and even, like he was commenting on the weather. Linda swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. It was just a dare. "Just," he repeated, testing the weight of the word like it amused him. Then his hand moved, not rushed, but deliberate, wrapping around her wrist. Not crushing, not hurting, anchoring, claiming. "You have no idea what clock you just started." Linda tried to pull away, but his grip was absolute, not painful, just immovable. "I'm good," she said, though her voice came out thinner than she wanted. "You can let go now. Dare's done." His gaze finally dropped to her face, not roaming, not softening, measuring her like she was a variable in an equation he was already solving. "Dares have rules," he said, thumb brushing the pulse point on her wrist, "and consequences." The club kept moving around them. Someone shrieked with laughter near the bar, glass shattered by the DJ booth. The bass throbbed through the floor like a living thing, but in their small pocket of space, the air felt vacuum-sealed, too thick to breathe. He finally released her wrist, but placed that blood-stained hand on the table beside her hip instead, close enough that she still felt caged. She noticed the blood was still wet. "You shouldn't let people push you into stupid choices," he said, voice carrying an edge that made her spine straighten involuntarily. "I wanted to," Linda heard herself say, lifting her chin in defiance she didn't quite feel. That earned her something new, not a smile, interest. He studied her for another long beat, and she studied him back. The sharp line of his jaw, the tattoo that crept from beneath his collar and traced his neck in patterns too intricate to make out in the red strobing chaos, the silver hoops that somehow made him look more lethal instead of less, the dried blood on his knuckles that said he'd already hurt someone tonight. Then he stepped back, giving her space as if he'd never invaded it in the first place. "Be careful, Linda West," he said. Just that, nothing more. But he knew her name. She hadn't told him her name. Linda didn't wait for an explanation. She turned and walked back to her booth, forcing her legs to move steady even though her pulse was trying to jackhammer through her skull. Behind her, she felt his gaze like heat on her spine. Michelle was already talking before Linda dropped into the booth. "Oh my God, what did he say? Did you see his face? That was insane, Linda. His guys almost—" "Nothing happened," Linda cut in, reaching for her drink with a hand that trembled just slightly. "It was fine." "Fine?" Tanya's eyebrows shot up. "Girl, you just watched the scariest man in this entire club, and he looked at you like he was deciding whether to destroy you or own you." Linda laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her. She downed half her glass, welcoming the burn. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" Tanya leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Because I'm pretty sure I just watched a predator mark his territory." "It was 3 seconds," Linda said firmly, "and now it's over." Except it wasn't. She knew it wasn't, because even as she tried to focus on her friends, tried to lose herself in the music and the champagne buzz and the victory high of closing that waterfront property deal, she could feel him. Every time she glanced toward the VIP section, he was there. Not staring, not leering, just aware, tracking her movements with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world and knew exactly how to use it. An hour crawled by, then another. Linda danced, laughed at Michelle's terrible jokes, took selfies with Tanya under the neon lights, did everything she could to prove to herself that the kiss meant nothing, that the tattooed man in the corner was just another story she'd tell someday about the wildest night she celebrated landing a 6-figure commission. But when she excused herself to the bathroom, weaving through the crowd on unsteady heels, she found him waiting in the hallway. "Jesus!" Linda pressed a hand to her chest, heart-lurching. "You scared me." Lee stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, looking like he'd been there for hours instead of seconds. Up close, away from the chaotic lighting, she could see him more clearly. The precise fade of his undercut, the way his shirt fit across his chest and shoulders like it had been tailored within an inch of perfection. The coldness in his eyes suggested that he didn't scare easily. Or at all. "That was the point," he said. Linda straightened, trying to reclaim some of the confidence she'd felt when this was all just tequila and a dare. "Are you following me?" Linda opened her mouth to answer, but Lee's phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, expression unchanging, then looked back at her with something that might have been regret on a different man's face. "Another time," he said, and walked past her without another word, leaving only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the lingering question of how he knew her name. She stood in that hallway for 3 full minutes before her legs remembered how to move. The next morning arrived with Miami sunlight too bright and a hangover that felt like divine punishment. Linda sat at her kitchen island, nursing black coffee, and trying to convince herself last night was just alcohol-fueled stupidity she'd never repeat. Then her phone rang. "Linda, girl, you need to see this." Michelle's voice crackled with an edge Linda had never heard before. "See what?" "Check the group chat, now." Linda opened it. The first thing she saw was a news article screenshot from the Miami Herald's crime section, dated 3 months ago. "Mystery Kingpin tightens grip on port operations." Below it, a grainy surveillance photo of a man in a tailored suit, face partially obscured, but the tattoos on his neck were unmistakable. Lee Jung-suk. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Michelle's text came rapid-fire. "That's him! That's your guy from last night! Linda, do you know who he is?" Tanya's message appeared next. "Korean Mafia. They're saying he controls half the smuggling routes through Miami. Drugs, weapons, everything." Linda's hands went cold. She spent the next 2 hours falling down a rabbit hole of whispers, rumors, and half-confirmed reports. Lee Jung-suk wasn't just dangerous. He was a ghost with a body count, the invisible hand that moved shipments through Florida's ports while local gangs tore each other apart over scraps. The police knew his name, but had nothing that would stick. The DEA had a file an inch thick and no arrests. He'd built an empire on ruthless discipline and blood debts. One article mentioned his rise began 5 years ago in Los Angeles after his family's syndicate fractured over a betrayal. Another whispered about a brother found dead in a warehouse, execution style, the killer never identified. Some said Lee had ordered it himself. Others said he'd pulled the trigger. Either way, he'd climbed to power over the bodies of everyone who doubted him. Linda closed her laptop with shaking hands. She'd kissed a monster. Across Miami, in a penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, Lee Jung-suk sat in a chair that cost more than most people's cars, studying a tablet his second-in-command had just handed him. Linda West, 29, real estate agent at Prestige Miami Properties, closed 8 figures in deals last year. No criminal record, no debts. Clean. Too clean, Lee said quietly. His lieutenant, a scarred man named Park, shifted his weight. Want me to? No. Lee's voice didn't rise, but Park went still. I want to know everything. Who she works with, who she talks to, what properties she's moving, but no one touches her. Park nodded once and left. Lee returned his attention to the tablet, scrolling through photos of Linda at work, at brunch, at the gym. She was smart, ambitious, and reckless enough to kiss a stranger on a dare without asking questions first. That kind of recklessness was either dangerous or useful. He intended to find out which. The surveillance started small. Tuesday morning, Linda noticed a black sedan parked across from her Brickell condo. Same car, different driver when she left for work. Wednesday, a potential client canceled a waterfront viewing with no explanation. Another followed Thursday, both properties she'd been pursuing for months. Friday, her assistant mentioned a man had called asking detailed questions about Linda's portfolio, then hung up when pressed for a name. By Saturday, Linda's confidence had cracked like glass under pressure. She double-checked her locks, took different routes to work, started seeing threats in every shadow. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Curiosity. Why was Lee Jung-suk interested in Linda? Why go through this elaborate surveillance instead of just approaching her directly? What did a mafia kingpin want with a real estate agent who drunkenly kissed a stranger on a dare? She should have been terrified, should have filed a police report or left Miami entirely. Instead, she found herself digging deeper, researching his known business fronts, mapping the properties rumored to be his, understanding the architecture of his empire. If he was watching her, she'd watch him. The call came Monday afternoon. Unknown number. Linda almost didn't answer. Miss West? The voice was smooth, professional, unfamiliar. My employer would like to discuss a business opportunity. He's interested in acquiring several waterfront properties in Brickell and South Beach areas. He believes your expertise would be invaluable. Who's your employer? A pause. I think you know. Her pulse kicked up. I'm not interested. He's offering triple your standard commission, and he'd like to meet Wednesday, 2 p.m. The address will be sent to you. I said I'm not. He also wanted me to mention, the voice continued, unbothered, that he appreciates your research this past week. Very thorough. He's impressed. The line went dead. Linda stared at her phone, heart hammering. He knew she'd been digging into his empire. He'd been watching her watch him. And now he was offering her a choice: walk into his world willingly or wait for him to drag her in. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Linda saved the address when it came through 5 minutes later. She told herself she was going to refuse him to his face. She told herself she still had a choice. But deep down, in the part of her that kissed a dangerous stranger just to prove she could, Linda West knew the truth. She'd already decided to say yes. The address led to a private lounge on the 42nd floor of a building that didn't advertise its existence. No sign outside, no company name on the directory, just a keycard reader and an elevator that required authorization. Linda didn't have until a man in an expensive suit appeared and gestured her inside without a word. The ride up was silent except for her heartbeat. The doors opened to floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, the kind of view that cost more per month than most people made in a year. The lounge was all dark wood and leather, empty except for one man standing at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the ocean like he owned it. Lee Jung-suk didn't turn around when she entered. You came, he said. You didn't give me much choice. You always have a choice, Miss West. Now he turned, and the afternoon light caught the silver in his ears, the ink on his neck. He'd traded last week's club attire for a charcoal suit that made him look less like a criminal and more like the kind of man who decide the fate of cities before breakfast. Linda forced herself to walk further into the room, heels clicking on marble. "What do you want?" "To offer you an opportunity." "I'm not interested in opportunities that come with surveillance teams." "Then you should choose your employers more carefully." "What's that supposed to mean?" Lee gestured to the leather sofa. "Sit. This will take a moment." "I'd rather stand." "Suit yourself." He moved to a side table, poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter, offered her one. When she didn't take it, he set it on the table beside her anyway. Linda Marie West, 29, born in Atlanta, moved to Miami 6 years ago with 2 suitcases and $4,000. Worked your way up from showing studio apartments in Hialeah to closing multi-million-dollar waterfront deals. You're good at what you do. Exceptional, even. Her skin prickled. You could have gotten that from LinkedIn. Your mother had cancer 3 years ago. You paid for her treatment. Drained your savings, maxed out 2 credit cards you're still paying off. You tell people you're fine, but you're 6 months from bankruptcy if you don't close something major soon. Linda's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. It became my business the moment you kissed me. He took a slow sip of his drink, eyes never leaving hers. You're ambitious, smart, desperate enough to take risks most people wouldn't. I can use someone like that. Use? She forced a laugh. That's what this is? A job interview? A partnership. I don't partner with criminals. No, Lee said quietly. You just work for them. The room tilted. Excuse me? He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, then turned it toward her. Documents filled the display, financial records, transaction histories, property transfers with signatures she recognized, including her own. Prestige Miami Properties has been laundering money for a Colombian cartel for the past 18 months, Lee said, voice matter of fact. Shell companies buying properties through your firm. Dirty money scrubbed clean through real estate deals you helped close. You didn't know, of course. Your boss made sure of that. But the DEA won't care about your ignorance when they make arrests. Linda's blood went cold. You're lying. I'm not. He set the phone down on the table. And I have copies. So do they, probably. It's only a matter of time before they move. She grabbed the phone, scrolling through documents that made her stomach turn. Properties she'd sold, contracts she'd negotiated, her signature on paperwork she'd never questioned because she'd trusted her firm to be legitimate. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm offering you a way out. Lee finished his drink, set the glass down with deliberate care. Work with me. Use your connections, your expertise to acquire properties I need. Warehouses near the port. Waterfront access, buildings with the right infrastructure. In exchange, I'll make sure your name stays clean when the DEA raids Prestige. I'll pay off your debts, and I'll triple what you're making now. You mean help you build your empire. I mean survive. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne again, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. You can refuse. Walk out of here, pretend this conversation never happened, but in 6 weeks, maybe 8, federal agents will show up at your door with questions you can't answer. Your career ends. Your mother loses her home. You spend the next decade trying to rebuild from nothing. Linda's hands shook. She set the phone down before he could see. And if I say yes, then you become untouchable. Why me? You could buy any real estate agent in Miami. Because you kissed a stranger on a dare without asking his name first. That kind of recklessness is either stupidity or courage. I watched you this past week, the way you dug into my background when you should have run, the way you came here when you should have refused. You're not stupid, Linda, which means you're brave. I am desperate. Desperation and ambition look the same from certain angles. He picked up the second glass, pressed it into her hand. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to be practical. You're drowning. I'm offering you a lifeline. The only question is whether your pride is worth more than your survival." Linda stared at the glass in her hand, at the amber liquid that probably cost more than her car payment. She thought about her mother's medical bills, her maxed-out credit cards, the DEA raids Lee promised were coming. She thought about how easily he dissected her life, how thoroughly he'd researched every vulnerability, every pressure point. And she thought about the fact that she was still standing in this room, listening when she should have left the moment he revealed what he knew. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Lee's expression shifted. Maybe surprise or respect? "I'm listening. I don't hurt anyone. I acquire properties, negotiate deals, nothing more. If your business involves violence, I'm not part of it." "Agreed. I want everything in writing. Payments, protections, all of it. I don't operate on handshakes and promises." His mouth curved. "Smart. And if I ever want out, I walk. No retaliation, no consequences. My debt to you ends when I say it does." The room went quiet. Lee studied her for a long moment, and Linda wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant by trying to negotiate with a man who probably crushed people for less. Then he extended his hand. "You have a deal, Miss West." She looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, inked fingers, the same hand that had gripped her wrist in the club, the hand of a killer offering salvation. Linda shook it. "Call me Linda. If we're partners, we might as well skip the formalities." Lee's smile was slow, dangerous, and for the first time, almost genuine. "Then call me Lee." He released her hand but didn't step back. "Welcome to the Empire, Linda. Try not to drown." She lifted the glass, met his eyes, and drank. The bourbon burned all the way down, but not as much as the knowledge that she'd just sold her soul to Miami's most dangerous man. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she regretted it. The first deal went down in a warehouse that smelled like salt water and diesel. Linda wore a navy pantsuit that cost half her monthly rent and carried a leather portfolio like she was showing a condo to tech millionaires instead of negotiating with men who had teardrop tattoos and guns tucked into their waistbands. "This is Mateo Ruiz," Lee introduced her to a Cuban man with silver at his temples and eyes like a shark. "He controls the shipments coming through the southern ports. Mateo, this is Linda West. She'll be handling our property acquisitions." Mateo looked at her, up and down, lingering too long. "You bring me a real estate agent to a business meeting?" "I bring you someone who can turn your dirty money into clean assets." Lee's voice didn't rise, but Mateo's smirk faltered. "She's here because we need warehouse space near Port Miami. Legitimate purchases, no attention from authorities. Linda can make that happen." Mateo switched to Spanish, something crude and dismissive. Linda answered in the same language, her accent flawless. "I can also make sure your competitors know which properties you're using if you waste my time with disrespect." The warehouse went quiet. Mateo laughed, loud and genuine. "She has teeth. I like her." He extended his hand. "All right, chica, show me what you can do." By the end of the week, Linda had secured 3 warehouses near the port under shell company names, so clean they could pass Senate confirmation. By the end of the month, she'd negotiated deals with corrupt port authorities who looked the other way for the right price, set up luxury condo developments in Brickell that existed solely to launder cartel money, and learned to read the language of criminals who spoke in euphemisms and threats. She was frighteningly good at it. "You're a natural," Lee said one night, watching her finalize paperwork in his penthouse office. The city glittered below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Miami spread out like a kingdom. "Most people take years to learn how to navigate this world without getting killed." Linda didn't look up at the contracts. "Most people aren't motivated by 6-figure debt and federal prison." "Is that still what's motivating you?" She paused, pen hovering over a signature line. "Is it?" The debts were paid now. Lee handled that in the first week, wiping out her mother's medical bills and her credit cards like they were pocket change. She could walk away clean if she wanted, but she didn't want to. "I'm good at this," she said quietly. "Better than I ever was at selling overpriced condos to trust fund kids." Yes, Lee agreed. You are.
Their eyes met across the desk, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. The acknowledgement that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and neither of them minded. The DEA raid happened on a Tuesday. Linda was at a luxury development site in Coral Gables, showing fabricated inspection reports to a building contractor who asked too many questions, when Lee's text came through. "Don't come to the office. They're here." Her blood went cold. She made it to the penthouse in 20 minutes, using the private elevator Lee had given her access to, and found chaos. Federal agents swarming the halls, boxes being carried out, Lee's second-in-command, Park, being led away in handcuffs, and Lee sitting in his office with 2 DEA agents across from him, looking unbothered as they asked questions designed to trap him. Linda walked in like she owned the place. "Mr. Lee, I have those revised property assessments you—" She stopped, feigning surprise. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had guests." The lead agent, a woman with severe features and a badge clipped to her belt, turned. "And you are?" "Linda West, Prestige Miami Properties." She pulled a business card from her portfolio, handed it over with a smile that betrayed nothing. "I'm Mr. Lee's real estate consultant. He's been looking to diversify his investment portfolio. Is there a problem?" "We're investigating financial irregularities tied to several properties your client has acquired." "Irregularities?" Linda frowned, concern painted perfectly across her face. "That's troubling. I've personally vetted every transaction to ensure full legal compliance. Mr. Lee has been very clear about wanting everything above board." She glanced at Lee. "Perhaps I should call our attorney." The agent studied her, looking for cracks. Linda held her gaze, years of closing deals under pressure making her unreadable. "These properties," the agent said, pulling out a list, "you facilitated these purchases?" Linda scanned the page. 6 addresses, all legitimate purchases, mixed with 3 that were definitely fronts for Lee's operations. She had seconds to decide which hill to die on. "These 3, she pointed to the clean ones, yes, I handled those directly. These others," she tapped the questionable properties, "those were processed through a different division at Prestige. I can provide documentation showing Mr. Lee's purchases were handled by separate agents." A calculated pause. "You might want to look into those agents, actually. I've had concerns about their thoroughness." She'd just thrown her old firm under the bus to save Lee. The agent's expression shifted. Linda had given her a new target, redirected suspicion away from Lee and toward Prestige's actual money laundering operation. "We'll need those documents." "Of course, I'll have everything couriered to your office by end of day." Linda turned to Lee, performance flawless. "I'm so sorry about this. I assured you our firm maintained the highest standards." Lee's eyes met hers, and she saw it. Respect. Gratitude. Something deeper that made her pulse quicken. "It's not your fault, Miss West," he said calmly. "I'm sure we'll have this cleared up shortly." The agents left an hour later with boxes of carefully curated evidence that would lead them exactly where Lee wanted them to go, away from him. When the door finally closed and they were alone, Lee crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the club. That had been her choice, her dare, her recklessness. This was gratitude and recognition, and something dangerous that had been building since the moment she'd negotiated terms instead of accepting his deal. Linda kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, adrenaline and victory and desire blurring into something she couldn't name. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lee pressed his forehead to hers. "You just saved my empire," Linda corrected. "Our empire." And he felt him smile against her skin. "Yes," he agreed, "ours." That night, lying in Lee's bed with Miami's lights stretching to the horizon, Linda traced the tattoos on his shoulder and wondered when survival had turned into ambition, when ambition had turned into power, and when power started feeling like belonging. "No regrets?" Lee asked, reading her silence. Linda thought about the woman she'd been 8 weeks ago, the one who'd kissed a stranger on a dare, who believed in clean money and honest work and staying on the right side of the law. That woman was gone. In her place was someone sharper, colder, more dangerous. Someone who lied to federal agents without flinching, who negotiated with cartel bosses and corrupt officials, who just destroyed her old firm to protect a criminal empire she was helping build. No, Linda said, and meant it. No regrets. Lee pulled her closer, and in the darkness of his penthouse kingdom, Linda West accepted the truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was thriving, and she never felt more alive. The storm hit Miami on a Wednesday night, rain lashing the penthouse windows like accusations. Linda found Lee standing at the glass, drink in hand, staring at nothing. She'd seen him cold, calculated, dangerous. She'd never seen him haunted. Lee? He didn't turn. My brother's name was Min Ho. He was older by 3 years, smarter, stronger. Our father always said Min Ho would lead the family. Linda approached slowly, recognizing the edge in his tone. This wasn't a story he told often, maybe ever. What happened? We came to America together, built the Miami operation from nothing. 5 years of blood and strategy and sacrifice. Lee took a long drink. Then he decided our success wasn't enough. He wanted more, faster. Started making side deals with the Colombians, cutting our own people out, funneling profits into offshore accounts I didn't know about. Thunder rolled across the bay. I confronted him, he denied it, looked me in the eye and swore loyalty while planning to sell our entire operation to a rival syndicate in Los Angeles. Lee's knuckles went white around the glass. He was going to destroy everything we'd built, kill everyone who'd stood with us, for money and a promise of power for men who'd have executed him the moment he outlived his usefulness. Linda's throat tightened. I pulled the trigger myself. Lee's voice cracked, barely perceptible, but there. He was my brother, and I killed him because if I hadn't, he'd have killed me, killed all of us. That's what leadership costs. That's what this life demands. You destroy what you love to protect what you've built. Linda crossed the distance between them and took the glass from his hand, setting it aside. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. You did what you had to do. Did I? His laugh was bitter. Or did I just prove I'm exactly the monster everyone says I am? You're not a monster. I executed my own brother, Linda. What does that make me? She held his gaze, unflinching. A survivor, a leader, someone who understands that mercy is a luxury empires can't afford. Something shifted in Lee's expression. His hands came up to grip her wrists, gentle despite the tremor in his fingers. How are you not terrified of me? Because I see you. Linda stepped closer, her voice steady as she felt her heart hammer. All of you. The monster and the man, the killer and the wounded brother who still has nightmares about pulling that trigger, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Lee's control shattered. He kissed her desperately, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, pulling her against him with a ferocity that bordered on violence but never crossed the line. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lee pressed his forehead to hers. I need you to understand what you're choosing. This world doesn't give second chances. Once you're all the way in, there's no walking back. I know. Do you? He pulled back to search her face. Because tomorrow I'm moving against Roberto Sandoval. He's been trying to muscle into our territory for months. If we don't eliminate him, he'll eliminate us. It won't be clean, it won't be distant. It'll be blood and brutality and the kind of violence that stains your soul.
Linda's pulse kicked up, but she didn't look away. What do you need from me? A meeting. You'll arrange it under the pretense of negotiating a property deal. Neutral ground, public enough that he'll feel safe, private enough that we can move without witnesses. You're using my reputation as bait. I'm using our partnership to survive. Lee's thumb brushed her cheek. But if you can't do this, if you want out, tell me now. I'll find another way. I won't. I'm in, Linda interrupted. All the way in, whatever it takes. 3 days later, Linda sat across from Roberto Sandoval in a private dining room at a steakhouse in Coconut Grove, discussing waterfront properties she had no intention of selling him. Roberto was handsome in the way of men who use their looks as weapons. Perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, a smile that probably charmed plenty of people who didn't know he'd ordered at least a dozen murders in the past year. "You have excellent taste, Miss West," he said, studying the property portfolios she'd carefully curated. "These locations would be perfect for my expanding interests." "Lee speaks highly of strategic acquisitions," Linda replied smoothly. "I thought you might appreciate the same level of expertise." "Lee," Roberto's smile sharpened, "how is your employer?" "He's well, building quite an empire." "Empires fall," Roberto leaned back, confidence radiating off him. "Especially those built too quickly by people who don't understand Miami's delicate ecosystem." Linda forced a smile. "Perhaps we should discuss the Brickell property, the one with port access?" As Roberto turned his attention to the documents, Linda sent the text under the table. "He's here." 5 minutes later, the lights went out. What happened next occurred in darkness and chaos. Shouting, gunfire, the sound of Roberto's bodyguards hitting the floor before they could draw weapons. Linda dropped beneath the table, heart slamming against her ribs, hands pressed over her ears as the world exploded into violence. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, Roberto Sandoval was dead on the floor, 3 bullets in his chest, and Lee was standing over him with a gun that was still smoking. Their eyes met across the carnage. Linda should have been screaming, should have been running, should have been calling the police or vomiting or having a complete psychological break. Instead, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and picked up her portfolio from where it had fallen. "We should go," she said, voice steady. "Someone will have heard the shots." Lee stared at her for a long moment, something like awe crossing his features. Then he nodded. Park appeared with 2 other men, already moving to clean up the scene. Lee took Linda's hand and led her out through the kitchen, past traumatized staff who'd learned long ago not to see things they couldn't afford to remember. In the car, neither of them spoke. Linda stared at her hands, steady, unmarked, the hands of someone who just helped orchestrate a murder and felt nothing but cold calculation about escape routes and alibis. "Are you all right?" Lee finally asked. Linda turned to him, saw her reflection in the window behind his head. She looked the same as she had this morning. Same face, same hair, same expensive blouse. But something inside her had fundamentally changed. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm all right." And the terrifying truth was, she meant it. She'd just helped kill a man, and the only thing she felt was relief that they'd survived. That night, in Lee's bed with the scent of gunpowder still clinging to his clothes, Linda accepted the final truth. She wasn't just working for the Empire anymore. She was part of it. Blood, darkness, and all. 6 months after Roberto Sandoval's death, Linda West sat in a boardroom overlooking Biscayne Bay, negotiating with Miami City Council as they rubber-stamped an urban renewal initiative that would line their pockets and launder $15 million through luxury developments. "The Cooper District project will revitalize an underserved community," she explained, voice smooth as silk, presenting renderings of gleaming high-rises that would price out every current resident within 2 years. "We're proposing a public-private partnership. The city provides tax incentives and expedited permits. We provide jobs, infrastructure, and a transformed waterfront." Councilman Garcia, who'd taken $50,000 in campaign contributions last month, nodded enthusiastically. "This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking development Miami needs." "Indeed," Linda agreed, knowing the construction contracts would go to shell companies that existed solely to move weapons shipments disguised as building materials, knowing the luxury condos would sell to international buyers whose money came from cartels, arms dealers, and oligarchs, knowing every brick would be mortared with corruption. The vote passed unanimously. Outside, Lee waited in the car. "How did it go?" "We own the Cooper District. Ground breaks in 3 weeks. By this time next year, we'll have 14 properties generating clean revenue and enough legitimate infrastructure to move shipments through 3 counties. Lee's hand found hers. "You're brilliant." "I'm useful," Linda squeezed back. "There's a difference." "No, you're brilliant. And terrifying. Park told me the Ochoa brothers asked if they could negotiate directly with you instead of me. They're scared of you, Linda." She should have been disturbed by that. A year ago, she would have. Now she felt something closer to satisfaction. The empire expanded like a virus, calculated and unstoppable. Linda restructured their entire operation, creating layers of legitimate businesses that masked the criminal infrastructure beneath. She established shell companies registered in Delaware and the Caymans, luxury condo developments in Brickell and Miami Beach that sold to carefully vetted buyers, paying cash for units that would never be occupied. Tech startups in Winewood that existed on paper only, generating fake revenue to justify massive money transfers. She negotiated with Colombian suppliers, Cuban smugglers, and corrupt officials from 3 different federal agencies. She learned to read financial forensics reports to understand exactly how much the DEA knew and didn't know. She hired lawyers, accountants, and logistics coordinators who asked no questions and got paid enough to keep their mouths shut. Within 8 months, Linda had transformed Lee's brutal but unsophisticated operation into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that rivaled corporations in complexity. The whispers started in back rooms and encrypted channels. Lee Jung-suk is dangerous, but his woman is the one who'll destroy you. Don't cross Linda West. She'll dismantle your entire operation and make it look legal. She's not his assistant. She's his equal. Maybe worse. Linda heard the rumors and did nothing to discourage them. Fear was currency in their world, and she'd learned to spend it wisely. One night, at a private club in South Beach, where Miami's criminal elite gathered under the guise of business networking, a rival operator named Victor Reyes made the mistake of underestimating her. "Lee's real estate girl," he said, smile patronizing as he cut into his steak. "I hear you're quite the negotiator."
Linda set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "I prefer architect." "Architect?" Victor laughed. "That's generous for someone who pushes papers." Lee tensed beside her, but Linda touched his arm. "Let me handle this." She leaned forward, voice dropping to something soft and lethal. "Victor, you're operating 2 warehouses near Port Everglades. The paperwork lists them under Southern Maritime Logistics, which is registered to your cousin Eduardo. You're moving cocaine through shipping containers labeled as agricultural equipment. The bribes you pay to port security total $8,000 a month, which is laughably low, which is why the DEA has surveillance on both locations." Victor's face went pale. "Now, you can continue believing I push papers," Linda continued, "or you can recognize that I know every detail of your operation, including the fact that your supplier in Cartagena is getting nervous about your debt. Your choice." Silence around the table. Victor cleared his throat. "My apologies, Miss West. I meant no disrespect." "Of course you didn't." Linda picked up her wine again, smile pleasant. "Enjoy your steak." After dinner, Lee pulled her aside. "You just threatened a man who's killed people for less." "I didn't threaten him. I informed him." Linda adjusted her bracelet, the diamond one Lee had given her last month. "And now he'll spread the word that challenging me comes with consequences. We won't have this problem again." Lee studied her face, something between pride and concern in his expression. "You've changed." "So have you." "No," he cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "I've always been this. You became it, and I'm not sure if I should be amazed or worried about what you're becoming." "What I'm becoming?" Linda met his eyes. "I'm becoming what this world requires, what we require, someone who can build and protect what we've created." "Our empire?" "Our empire," she confirmed. He kissed her then, in full view of Miami's most dangerous criminals, marking her as his in every way that mattered. But they both knew the truth. She wasn't just his anymore. She was her own kingdom. The attack came 3 weeks later. A car bomb outside one of their warehouses, sniper fire at a property Linda was supposed to inspect but had rescheduled last minute, a coordinated effort to destabilize their operation by hitting multiple fronts simultaneously. Someone had declared war. Linda stood in Lee's office, studying maps and reports, tracking the pattern.
It's not random. They're targeting our expansion into Broward County. Someone doesn't want us moving north. The Volkov Bratva, Park said grimly. They control Fort Lauderdale. We've been encroaching on their territory. Lee's jaw tightened. Then we need to send a message. No, Linda's voice cut through the room. We need to eliminate them entirely. Half measures invite retaliation. We move decisively or not at all. Everyone turned to look at her. You're talking about going to war with the Russian mob, Park said carefully. I'm talking about survival. Linda met Lee's gaze. They've already started the war. We just need to finish it. Lee's smile was slow, dangerous, and full of dark pride. What do you suggest? Linda pulled up financial records on the screen. We destroy their money first, freeze their accounts, expose their fronts, turn their own suppliers against them, make them vulnerable. Then we strike. That could take weeks. Then we move fast. Linda's expression was cold, calculating, exactly the face of someone who'd orchestrated a murder and felt nothing. We have the resources, we have the connections, and we have something they don't. What's that? Me. Linda straightened, meeting the eyes of every man in the room. I've built relationships with people they need. I can dismantle their infrastructure faster than they can rebuild it. But we commit fully, or we don't do this at all. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Lee nodded. We commit. Fully, Linda confirmed. As the meeting dissolved into strategic planning, Lee caught her hand. This is it, he said quietly. The point where we either conquer or die. Linda looked at the city spread out below them, the empire they'd built from bourbon kisses and calculated risks, from bloodshed and ambition. Then we conquer, she said. And in that moment, standing at the edge of war with Miami's underworld at her feet, Linda West understood what she'd truly become. Not just a queen, a weapon. The war started with fire. 3 of their warehouses burned simultaneously across Miami, Port of Miami, Hialeah, and Opa-locka, coordinated strikes timed to the minute, designed to cripple their distribution network and announce that the Volkov Bratva wasn't fighting alone. Linda watched the news footage in Lee's office, flames reflecting in the windows, and realized the scope of what they faced. It's not just the Russians, she said quietly. This is a coalition. Park confirmed it within the hour. The Volkov Bratva had allied with the remnants of Sandoval's organization and 2 Cuban gangs Linda had alienated during negotiations. Worse, someone inside their operation was feeding information to the alliance: locations, shipment schedules, security protocols. They had a traitor. We need to identify the leak, Lee said, voice deadly calm, before they hit us again. Linda was already pulling up personnel files. Start with anyone who had access to all 3 warehouse locations. Cross-reference with financial records for unusual deposits or sudden lifestyle changes. By dawn, they had 5 names. By noon, Linda had narrowed it to 1, Marcus Chen, a logistics coordinator who'd been with them since the beginning. His 15-year-old daughter, Isabella, had leukemia. The Russians had offered to pay for her treatment in exchange for information. Bring him in, Lee ordered. Linda touched his arm. Let me handle this. She leaned forward, soft and lethal. Victor, you're operating 2 warehouses near Port Everglades. The paperwork lists them under Southern Maritime Logistics, which is registered to your cousin Eduardo. You're moving cocaine through shipping containers labeled as agricultural equipment. The bribes you pay to port security total $8,000 a month, which is laughably low, which is why the DEA has surveillance on both locations. Victor's face went pale. Now, you can continue believing I push papers, Linda continued, or you can recognize that I know every detail of your operation, including the fact that your supplier in Cartagena is getting nervous about your debt. Your choice. Silence around the table. Victor cleared his throat. My apologies, Miss West. I meant no disrespect. Of course you didn't. Linda picked up her wine again, smile pleasant. Enjoy your steak. After dinner, Lee pulled her aside. You just threatened a man who's killed people for less. I didn't threaten him. I informed him. Linda adjusted her bracelet, the diamond one Lee had given her last month. And now he'll spread the word that challenging me comes with consequences. We won't have this problem again. Lee studied her face, something between pride and concern in his expression. You've changed. So have you. No, he cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. I've always been this. You became it, and I'm not sure if I should be amazed or worried about what you're becoming. What I'm becoming? Linda met his eyes. I'm becoming what this world requires, what we require, someone who can build and protect what we've created. Our empire? Our empire, she confirmed. He kissed her then, in full view of Miami's most dangerous criminals, marking her as his in every way that mattered. But they both knew the truth. She wasn't just his anymore. She was her own kingdom. The attack came 3 weeks later. A car bomb outside one of their warehouses, sniper fire at a property Linda was supposed to inspect but had rescheduled last minute, a coordinated effort to destabilize their operation by hitting multiple fronts simultaneously. Someone had declared war. Linda stood in Lee's office, studying maps and reports, tracking the pattern. It's not random. They're targeting our expansion into Broward County. Someone doesn't want us moving north. The Volkov Bratva, Park said grimly. They control Fort Lauderdale. We've been encroaching on their territory. Lee's jaw tightened. Then we need to send a message. No, Linda's voice cut through the room. We need to eliminate them entirely. Half measures invite retaliation. We move decisively or not at all. Everyone turned to look at her. You're talking about going to war with the Russian mob, Park said carefully. I'm talking about survival. Linda met Lee's gaze. They've already started the war. We just need to finish it. Lee's smile was slow, dangerous, and full of dark pride. What do you suggest? Linda pulled up financial records on the screen. We destroy their money first, freeze their accounts, expose their fronts, turn their own suppliers against them, make them vulnerable. Then we strike. That could take weeks. Then we move fast. Linda's expression was cold, calculating, exactly the face of someone who'd orchestrated a murder and felt nothing. We have the resources, we have the connections, and we have something they don't. What's that? Me. Linda straightened, meeting the eyes of every man in the room. I've built relationships with people they need. I can dismantle their infrastructure faster than they can rebuild it. But we commit fully, or we don't do this at all. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Lee nodded. We commit. Fully, Linda confirmed. As the meeting dissolved into strategic planning, Lee caught her hand. This is it, he said quietly. The point where we either conquer or die. Linda looked at the city spread out below them, the empire they'd built. From bourbon kisses and calculated risks, from bloodshed and ambition. Then we conquer, she said. And in that moment, standing at the edge of war with Miami's underworld at her feet, Linda West understood what she'd truly become. Not just a queen, a weapon. The war started with fire. 3 of their warehouses burned simultaneously across Miami, Port of Miami, Hialeah, and Opa-locka. Coordinated strikes, timed to the minute, designed to cripple their distribution network and announce that the Volkov Bratva wasn't fighting alone. Linda watched the news footage in Lee's office, flames reflecting in the windows, and realized the scope of what they faced. It's not just the Russians, she said quietly. This is a coalition. Park confirmed it within the hour. The Volkov Bratva had allied with the remnants of Sandoval's organization and 2 Cuban gangs Linda had alienated during negotiations. Worse, someone inside their operation was feeding information to the alliance. Locations, shipment schedules, security protocols. They had a traitor. We need to identify the leak, Lee said, voice deadly calm, before they hit us again. Linda was already pulling up personnel files. Start with anyone who had access to all 3 warehouse locations. Cross-reference with financial records for unusual deposits or sudden lifestyle changes. By dawn, they had 5 names. By noon, Linda had narrowed it to 1. Marcus Chen, a logistics coordinator who'd been with them since the beginning. His 15-year-old daughter had leukemia. The Russians had offered to pay for her treatment in exchange for information. Bring him in, Lee ordered. Linda touched his arm. Let me handle this. Marcus sat in the basement of a property that didn't officially exist, hands zip-tied, face pale with the knowledge of what came next. Linda sat across from him, composed in a gray suit, looking every bit the corporate executive instead of the woman deciding whether he lived or died. Your daughter, Isabella, how is she? Marcus's eyes widened. Please, please don't hurt her. She doesn't know anything. This is all on me. I'm not going to hurt a sick child, Marcus. Linda's voice was soft, almost kind. I'm trying to understand why you betrayed us. They said they'd pay for her treatment, experimental therapy in Germany. It's her only chance. Tears streaked down his face. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to, but she's my daughter. Linda understood. She'd paid her own mother's medical bills with dirty money. She'd crossed lives she couldn't uncross to protect the people she loved. But understanding didn't change the equation. You got 7 of our people killed in those warehouse fires. You've exposed our entire northern expansion, and you've given our enemies a blueprint to destroy everything we've built. I'll fix it. I'll feed them false information. I'll do whatever you want. They won't trust you now. You're useless to them and a liability to us. Linda stood, smoothing her skirt. But I'm not going to kill you, Marcus. Hope flickered in his eyes. I'm going to pay for Isabella's treatment myself. Full coverage. The German clinic, the best doctors, everything she needs. In exchange, you're going to give the Russians one last piece of information. Tomorrow's shipment location. Except it won't be a shipment. Marcus's face went white as he understood. It'll be a trap, Linda confirmed. You're going to help us kill every single person in that alliance who thinks they can take what's ours. And then you're going to disappear. New city, new identity, and you never speak our names again. And if I refuse? Linda's expression didn't change. Then Isabella's treatment stops, and you die, knowing you could have saved her but chose pride instead. Your choice, Marcus. Make it fast. He made it. The trap was set for a warehouse in Woonwood, supposedly containing a shipment of firearms worth $2 million. Linda orchestrated every detail. The false intel Marcus would leak, the positioning of our people, the escape routes, the timing. You should stay back, Lee said the night before. Let me handle the field work. No. Linda checked the gun Park had taught her to use, movements efficient and practiced. If this goes wrong, they'll come for both of us. I need to see it through. The ambush happened at 2 a.m. The Volkov-Bratva arrived with the Cubans and Sandoval's people, 20 men armed and confident they were about to steal a fortune. They entered the warehouse through the main entrance, through the side doors, through the loading bay. Linda gave the signal. The doors sealed, lights cut out, and hell opened up. Gunfire erupted in the darkness, muzzle flashes like lightning, screams cut short by bullets and blood. Linda crouched behind a concrete pillar, heart hammering as Lee's people systematically eliminated the coalition forces with ruthless efficiency. Then she saw him. Dmitry Volkov, the Bratva leader, wounded but moving towards an exit Linda knew existed because she'd studied the blueprints. If he escaped, he'd regroup. The war would continue. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Linda stepped out of cover, raised her gun, and fired 3 times. The first shot went wide, the second hit a shoulder, the third caught him in the chest. Dmitry Volkov collapsed, blood spreading across the concrete, eyes finding hers in his final moments. She'd killed him. Not in the chaos of Sandoval's assassination where she could pretend it wasn't her hand, not in self-defense, but deliberately, coldly, because he was a threat that needed elimination. Linda lowered the gun, hands steady despite the thunder of her pulse. Linda! Lee appeared beside her, checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? No. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. I'm fine. The warehouse fell silent except for moans of the dying. 15 bodies, the entire coalition leadership, dead in a single night. But victory had a price. During the firefight, A stray bullet had punched through the wall and killed a homeless man sleeping in the alley, an innocent casualty of their war. Linda stood over the body later, police sirens wailing in the distance, and felt something crack inside her chest. She'd convinced herself the violence was contained, that their war only hurt those who'd chosen to play the game, but blood didn't care about justifications or careful planning. Innocents died in crossfire. Families suffered for sins they didn't commit. The city bled because she and Lee had decided they wanted to rule it. "We need to move," Park urged. "Cops are 2 minutes out." Linda nodded numbly and let Lee guide her to the car. That night, she couldn't sleep. Couldn't unsee Dimitri's eyes, or the homeless man's twisted body, or Marcus's tears as he'd begged for his daughter's life. "Talk to me," Lee said in the darkness. "I killed someone tonight." Linda's voice was hollow. "Really killed them. Looked them in the eyes and pulled the trigger." "I know. And I'd do it again." That's the part that terrified her. To protect what we've built, to survive, to win, I'd do it all again. Lee pulled her against him, and she felt his heartbeat, steady and certain. "That's what it means to rule, Linda, to make impossible choices and live with the consequences." "Does it get easier?" "No." His answer was gentle but unflinching. "It gets heavier, but you get stronger." Linda closed her eyes and felt the weight settle over her like armor she could never remove. The war for Miami was over. They'd won. But the cost was measured in blood and fractured pieces of the person she used to be, scattered across warehouse floors and burning buildings, irretrievable and gone forever. She was a queen now, but queenship, she'd learned, was just another word for haunted. The call came at dawn, 2 weeks after they'd crushed the coalition. "It's a trap." Park's voice crackled with static and urgency. "Lee, don't go to the Port Miami warehouse. They knew about the shipment. Someone's still feeding them information." But Lee was already there. Linda's blood turned to ice. "How long ago did he leave?" 20 minutes. She was in her car before Park finished the sentence, gun in her purse, phone pressed to her ear as she dialed Lee's number. It went straight to voicemail. The warehouse district looked wrong when she arrived. Too quiet, no workers, no morning traffic. Smoke curled from the main building's roof, dark and toxic against the pale sky. Linda abandoned the car and ran. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and gasoline fumes. Fire crawled up the walls, eating through wooden pallets and cardboard, transforming the warehouse into a furnace. Through the haze, she saw bodies. Lee's people, gunned down in what looked like an ambush. "Lee!" Her voice was raw, desperate. "Linda?" His shout came from deeper in the building. "Get out. The whole place is rigged to blow." She followed his voice to a back corner where Lee was pinned down behind a concrete pillar, bleeding from a shoulder wound, facing 3 men in tactical gear. Not the coalition, not Russians or Cubans, DEA. Or, at least that's what their vests said. "Ms. West," the lead agent lowered his gun, smile cold and wrong. "Convenient. Saves us a trip." Linda's stomach dropped. These weren't federal agents. They were mercenaries in stolen gear, probably hired by someone with enough money to want Lee and Linda both dead. "Who's paying you?" Linda demanded. "Does it matter? You made too many enemies. Someone always pays." He raised his gun toward Lee. Nothing personal, just business. Linda drew her weapon and fired. The shot went wide, intentionally, shattering an overhead pipe. Water exploded outward with pressure, knocking the mercenary off balance. Lee used the distraction to return fire, dropping the man with 2 bullets to the chest. The other 2 scattered, firing wildly as flames spread and smoke thickened. "The exit's blocked," Lee shouted over the roar of fire. "They sealed the doors." Linda's mind raced, dragging up blueprints she'd memorized months earlier. "Loading dock, east wall, there's a service entrance." They moved together through smoke and flames, covering each other as the remaining mercenaries pursued. Linda's lungs burned, her eyes streamed, but she kept moving, kept firing, kept Lee alive through pure force of will. A bullet grazed her arm. She barely felt it. Lee took one to the leg and went down. Linda grabbed him, dragging him forward with strength born from desperation. "Don't you dare die on me." "Wasn't planning on it." The service door was blocked by burning debris. Linda kicked at it frantically while Lee provided covering fire with his last magazine. The wood splintered, metal groaned. Then they were through, stumbling into the dawn air as the warehouse exploded behind them in a fireball that rattled windows half a mile away. They collapsed on the concrete, coughing smoke, bleeding, alive. The safe house was a beach property in Key Biscayne, one of 20 dozen Linda had acquired under false names for exactly this scenario. She treated Lee's wounds from a first aid kit while dawn broke over the ocean, washing the sky in gold and pink that felt obscene after the night they'd survived. "You should have run," Lee said, voice rough with smoke damage. "When Park called, you could have disappeared, started over somewhere I'd never find you." Linda's hands stilled on the bandage. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to live." He caught her wrist the same way he had that first night in the club, but gentler now, desperate instead of possessive. "Linda, I've destroyed everything I've touched. My brother, my family, every person who's gotten close to me ends up dead or damaged. You're the only good thing I have left, and I'm going to get you killed." "You don't get to make that choice for me." "Someone has to. You walked into a burning building tonight. You could have died." "So could you." Linda yanked her hand free, anger and fear and love tangling into something she couldn't name. "You didn't make me anything," she said quietly. "I chose this. Every step, every compromise, every line I crossed, I chose you, Lee, not because I was trapped or desperate or afraid, because I wanted the power. I wanted the empire. I wanted you. Even knowing what it costs? Especially knowing what it costs." Linda cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not some innocent you corrupted. I'm your equal, your partner, and I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm your lover or your employee, but because we built something together that's worth fighting for." Lee's hands came up to cover hers, trembling. "I love you," he said, the words raw and unpracticed. "I've never said that to anyone, never let myself feel it. But I love you, and if something happened to you because of me, then we die together." Linda's voice was steady, certain. "We don't run, we don't hide. We rule or we burn, Lee. Those are the only options left." He kissed her then, tasting smoke and blood and desperate relief. When they pulled apart, Linda saw what she needed to see in his eyes. Acceptance, understanding, the knowledge that she wasn't leaving, that she was committed as fully as he was, for better or worse, through blood and fire and whatever came next. "We need to find out who hired those mercenaries," Linda said, already thinking 3 moves ahead. "We will. And we need to restructure security. Someone's still leaking information." "Agreed." And then, Linda looked out at the ocean, at the empire they'd bled for spread across Miami's glittering skyline. "Then we remind everyone why crossing us is a death sentence." Lee pulled her against him, and they sat in the wreckage of their survival, 2 people who'd chosen darkness and each other with equal certainty. The war had cost them, nearly killed them, stripped away any pretense that they were anything but criminals building a kingdom on bones and ambition. But they'd survived. Together. Equal in power, equal in guilt, equal in the terrible love that bound them tighter than any blood oath. The sun rose over Miami, painting the world in light that did nothing to chase away the shadows they carried. But shadows, Linda had learned, were just where empires were born. And theirs was just beginning.